Hello, it's Reija and welcome to another video. Today I have something special planned for you because I am going to be talking about the Hugo nominees for the short story category. Without further ado, let's get started. So this will hopefully be the first in a series of videos that I'm going to be doing in order to be more accountable and also document my Hugo reading and also my responses to the various stories in different Hugo categories. And today I am starting with the short story category, which I just recently finished, and I am going to be ranking the stories from my least favorite to my top story, and the story which I'm most likely going to be nominated as my top tier pick for the actual award. This is not meant to influence anyone else's voting, these are just my opinions, but I thought that it would be interesting to compare and contrast with other creators who are also reading for the Hugo Awards. So without further ado, I am just going to be diving right in with the first story, or my least favorite, and that was Tangles by Seanan McGuire. Now, this is originally published in as part of the magicthegathering.com. This is a tie-in short story, and it was published in 2021 at magicthegathering.com. I don't necessarily think that the fact that it is a tie-in novel is necessarily the problem, or tie-in story, because I have read plenty of tie-in stories that can stand on their own, so that necessarily wasn't the issue for me. The issue was, for me, that I didn't really feel connected to these characters. You are just sort of dropped into this world without much explanation and preamble. You kind of do have a chance to pick up the pieces and kind of figure out where things stand, but not a lot of context clues are really given to you. So in that sense, you should really already be familiar with these concepts and characters from the Magic the Gathering universe before diving in and to really enjoy the story, in my opinion. And because I haven't really been involved in the Magic the Gathering scene for a long time, I don't have that context anymore. Therefore, it was a lot harder for me to really pick up what these characters were about and why I should root for them, essentially. There seems to be a lot of history behind both of these characters that is never really explained or brought to the forefront. You're just expected to know it. And that kind of bothered me, so that's why I didn't really get connected or invested in the story that much, and it ended up being at the bottom of my list. Next up on my list would be Mr. Death by Alix E. Harrow. Now, on the surface, this was actually really an interesting story. It is basically about this Reaper who has been recruited after death, and there's this sort of organization or a department of Reapers, a department of death, and they are essentially souls of people who have died and who have witnessed sort of this relentless trauma in their actual lives, and therefore can approach the dying with empathy. And there is a lot of interesting world building in this. However, I just thought that the story itself was very sort of saccharine and didn't really have a lot to say. It was a fine story, but put in comparison with all the rest of the stories, it doesn't really stand out. And there is this weird, almost moralistic high-handedness about the story that I have noticed in previous stories that I have read from Alix E. Harrow, that there's this sort of almost uncomfortably black and white moralistic tendency that she does in a lot of her stories. There was also a moment in this where I was kind of questioning whether a certain line was an authorial intent or a character choice, which was a little bit pro-lifey to me in kind of it was only one line, but also that line didn't necessarily need to be there. It was kind of like off-putting. And there also was this interesting thing where the character point of view, they are sort of inserting their own morals and their own grief into this completely separate from them person, and nobody really questions them or judges them. They are just sort of like this character starts feeling a certain way, goes through the story, and nothing really happens to them. They kind of get to go with the flow, go with the motions, and get scot-free. Like with not, they actually kind of get rewarded for like going by their own moral code, which I found to be kind of infuriating. So yeah, this is why Mr. Death was not one of my favorites. Next up on my list is Unknown Number by Blue Neustifter, and this one actually was really interesting. The only reason that I didn't really put it higher on my list is because of there was this sort of like mismatch between some of the like dialogue. Like it felt like messages were being left out, and I don't know if that was intentional or not. Like sometimes it felt like there were these messages and then the conversation didn't get picked up from where I think it logically would have continued, or it would have logically picked up from. So that was a little bit jarring. But I did like the concept and I like the format. It's basically all these like messenger app messages between two people who are essentially the same person but from different realities. I thought that it was a really interesting format, and there was a lot of like joy in self-discovery and also finding the courage to be yourself. But like I said, because of the pacing and the weird mismatchiness between the like messages, I kind of felt like I was pulled out of the story a couple of times. So that is why it is not higher on my list. Coming up at number 3 on my list is The Sin of America by Catherynne M. Valente. And this is really an interesting approach because the story essentially is about this person who gets chosen to figuratively and physically eat the sin of America. Essentially, this story is about scapegoating and who we use as sort of scapegoats and who we vilify in order to avoid taking responsibility of our own actions and our own complicitness in certain events and systems. And if it were only that, I think I would have really liked it, but it comes bundled with Catherynne M. Valente's writing style, which can be very ponderous and very sort of over the top flowery. And I just felt that with this type of content and this type of topic, I kind of want a more blunt, more visceral, authorial voice. Reading this story kind of felt like Catherynne M. Valente was treating me with kid gloves, like I couldn't handle the real messiness of the topic of the story. So instead, she sort of covers it and sort of wraps it in this very flowery purple prose in order to take the edge off. But I sincerely think that this kind of topic, this story, requires the edge. So that is why it is only 3rd on my list. Number 2 on my list is Where Oaken Hearts Do Gather by Sarah Pinsker. This is a fun one because it kind of deals with media literacy, it deals with research rabbit holes, it deals with online communities and especially like music communities, and it's also a horror story. And it is interesting because it has kind of like 3 layers. It has the song, which is its own narrative. Then it has the kind of story within a story of people analyzing the song in a sort of like community, a message board. and analyzing the song and doing like footnotes on the lyrics. And then there's the third layer of the kind of horror story unraveling itself within the community. And I thought that that was really interesting. And there were like a lot of like powerful scenes and like Easter eggs and all these things. Like if you've ever frequented those types of like message boards, you will instantly like see the play on like different types of characters and like people who frequent those message boards. So I thought that was really interesting. There's also like interesting things being said about like female agency and such. But while I think that this was technically a very impressive piece of fiction, I don't think it was really saying anything like worthwhile or commenting on any specific like important themes, which can be fine, but it is not necessarily what I am usually looking for, especially if I'm like reading for awards. So that is why it is only second on my list, but I really enjoyed it. So the top story on my list, and the one that I'm personally going to be voting for the Hugo Award for Short Story, is Proof by Induction by José Pablo Iriarte. And what I liked about this is that it kind of disguises itself as a sort of hard sci-fi story. It deals heavily with math and mathematics and mathematic discovery. And there's also this idea that this science fiction like conceit, this narrative construct where you can take snapshots of people before they die in order to make the bureaucracy of death easier. So basically people can then go and talk to the snapshot of the person who has died and discover whether they had like a will or like a life insurance policy, etc. And the main character of this story is a mathematician and who had a very strained relationship with his father, who has now died. And he goes to this snapshot and starts to use it in order to finish up the scientific research that his father was doing. And on the surface, it seems like this is like a science fiction, like super hard science fiction story about like this research, but in actuality, it is all about dealing with grief. So it's about humanity and like the human aspect of science fiction. And I thought that it was really beautifully executed. I thought that I understood these characters and their relationships, even though we don't really get to know too deeply about them. But you really get to see what kind of like a married life the main character is living, what kind of a father he is to his daughter, and also how his experience with his own father influenced his like behavior and his approach to fatherhood and stuff. I thought that it was really beautifully done, especially in such a short amount of pages. It was such a lovely story, and that is why I am going to be voting for it in the Hugos. And there you have it. Those were all of my thoughts on the short story category. Hopefully next I am going to be doing novelettes, but I am also currently moving house, so there's a lot of things that I am in the middle of at the moment, which might affect my ability to produce videos. So fingers crossed. And if you like this video, please leave me a rocket ship emoji down in the comments, because that is the Hugo Award symbol. And I will see you in another video very soon. Bye bye!